Joining us for another Empowering Youth weekly roundtable. I guess we have to take our sip. What is it called again, Joe?
The simultaneous sip.
Simultaneous sip. If you guys have your glass, join us for a sip. And let's take, again, a collective breath with a promise for openness and curiosity. So let's do that together right now. Let's breathe in and out. It's good. I felt like I really needed that right now. A little bit of centering. As always, I guess raise your hand if you have any questions or you want to share, because that's what this is about, sharing, and that's what makes this space really important. I want to ground this space for community. Everyone understands that this is a brave space. We have multiple truths here that are true all at the same time. Everybody has something to contribute. I might be leading off here, but I'm definitely not the expert, and neither is anybody else here. We want to practice grace. We want to make sure that this is a discrimination-free space, and we want to embrace the spectrum of self-directed learning and parenting. And today's talk is on our parental beginnings. I am really excited about this one, and I want to share with you kind of my story, my parental beginning story. Yeah, it takes some vulnerability to dig into this, but I think that's kind of where the best stories happen. So let me kick this off, and then again, I invite you all to share what comes up for you, your reflections, maybe a bit of your own stories, and that's where the good stuff comes from, right? All right. So our parental beginnings. There's an awesome quote attributed to Maya Angelou that goes, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better." That makes sense, right? To me, this quote is parenting in a nutshell. When I first decided to try to become a parent, it seemed like the right thing to do. I'd been married a couple of years and my wife wanted a child. I didn't have a good enough argument against that, and after a while, the idea grew on me, and I gave in. I gave in with a vague understanding that I would have less time and less freedom, and that parenting was a hard and tiring thing. What I thought I knew was that having a child was a gift, and that if I loved my wife, which I wholeheartedly did, in many ways I owed her that much to give her a child. Honestly, those scraps of information, along with a couple of light books on raising a baby, were enough to get me started, even with praise from those around me. And as on a side note, I realized how low the bar is set for potential parents, especially for potential fathers. It's like, wow, you read a book on infants. Wow, okay, yeah, you're good to go. You're way better than where I was. What I didn't have, though, was a good enough understanding of myself to be truly successful, or even to know what I was really getting myself into. Only a handful of years ago did I learn that I had anxiety with a touch of depression. Only within the last 2 years did I reach the growing realization that I had ADHD. I'm 38 years old. How disconnected from myself did I need to be to believe that what I was experiencing was typical? Why wasn't there one person in my life that I could share my inner self with that had possible answers for me? What I also didn't have was an inkling of current parenting knowledge or skill. I knew spanking was proven harmful and ineffective long ago. I vaguely understood the 4 parenting styles, but I didn't know it was actually never science-backed. The most current knowledge I had at the time was the importance of breast milk, and I felt almost radical to know that early weaning wasn't maximizing the benefits of breast milk. I was taught all about training babies, including getting them to sleep separately, getting them to used to bottle feeding, getting them on a schedule, and generally getting them to be less needy and more self-sufficient, all to benefit the caretakers in their lives. but I hadn't heard even a tinge of the criticism to these conventional parenting practices, except from the concerns my wife and I privately brought up to each other. Is this okay? Does this feel right, what we're doing? I didn't wonder why we were always trying to get babies somewhere. Why weren't we just letting them be or even following their lead and providing for their wants and needs? And this is just a short list of what I didn't know for the infant stage. Imagine all that I didn't know for the next 9 years of my son's life. It's humbling, really. How could I empower my son with a ragtag collection of common yet largely misguided beliefs and disproven science? How could I teach him to know himself if I didn't even know myself? Not knowing myself meant I was running the significant risk of trying to be someone I wasn't, and even worse, trying to push my growing child to be someone he wasn't. With each passing year, I'm astonished by what I discover about parenting, and every year I'm astonished by how relatively little information I use to make the decision to become a parent. I wish more humans were able to make fully, truly informed decisions in life concerning matters such as marriage, higher education, and careers. Informed decision making seems doubly important when considering whether or not to give life to someone you should love and guide until one of you passes on. This includes the real science of connection in infancy and beyond, the science of learning, and the deep, unwavering responsibilities of raising and guiding someone whose main role is to figure out who they are. What have you learned since becoming a parent? What have you learned about parenting, and what have you learned about yourself? Sure, learn by doing is a great motto, but what do you wish you knew from the start? And what might you still have to learn? So I guess I want to open it up. And I want to hear your reflections, your thoughts, and any bits of your stories that you would like to share. Yeah, Joe.
I was one of two dudes in the 30 or so people that would show up to the class on breastfeeding and other like early baby support classes, trying to be a good husband, be a good father. But I remember while I was there, though, I remember thinking, like, for so long, for thousands, million years plus, like, people didn't take classes on parenting. They just had babies. And then, so I don't know, it's just to be so reflective. The idea of being intentional about it, I think, is a rather radical concept. I don't know if people were really intentional about it before, but I'm certainly trying to be.
Any other thoughts? Jeff.
Off of what Joe and what you were saying, Dan, I think it is the most intentional act. I think it's amazing how many people don't really think about. They never ask themselves. And you alluded this in your essay and then your speech now. Like, why have kids? What is it? What's the point, right? Why is that even a value, right? And I think if you can answer that question properly, if you've thought through it, I think that alone is such a big step in the direction of being a good parent. Like I can only imagine how much follows through if you're thinking that way up front, how much better that'll make you as a parent. Like you'll always be thinking long term because that's already a long term type of thought. So you can develop these thinking habits. So just getting, I think that's just the first and most important step is just always thinking like, what are your values? And then why is having children a value to you? And I think you alluded that to your essay. I think so many people don't think about that. So I think that's probably the best place to start as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, it's almost like intentionality is not really present in a lot of our lives. And then when it comes to pairing, it becomes so clear that we weren't being intentional. And then we're like, oh, all right, we can't just scramble and do everything last minute and just guess that what our parents did was correct and keep following what other people are telling us to do. Because at that point, it starts we're starting to get the results of our lack of intentionality. Yeah, that's tricky, and maybe that's the broader question is why we're not as intentional as we could be growing up and in life. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Well, I kind of just thinking, well, somebody said, what is the goal of parenting, and thinking about intentionality in babies and what you said, like, why are we always trying to get babies somewhere? I almost think that there's a certain amount of intentionality when you have an infant that is not helpful. Because I experienced that with myself, with my kids, like, always people saying you should be getting them, Joel, you should be getting them to sleep through the night, you should be getting them to do that. Like, we've had these various styles of infant raising that, it is really a harmful intentionality, versus if we look at the goal of parenting as an infant, really is to have like they say, fed is best, to have a child that is cared for versus one that's going to fit into some kind of like format that we think they need to have. And I mean, I don't know about other people. I had 3 kids and they were all very different as infants. So they all had their own format for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like being intentional is not enough. We need the right information as well. And that's not something that's widely available. Even though the research is out there, it doesn't ever trickle down to people that are interested in having kids to a large degree. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I was also thinking about what you just said, Elizabeth and Dan, and how I think that in order to be intentional, sometimes that's such a deep reflective thing. And if we have perhaps too many responsibilities or things on our plate emotionally, mentally, and just like, just adult life, it can make it difficult to be able to be that reflective if we're in just do accomplish mode. And obviously that might be a luxury as well to some, because that's not always realistic, but I was just thinking about that as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. I often think about the different modes that we're in, and like the work mode, or like what I call the go mode, is in, direct contrast to like open and curious and be present with your children mode, or making good decisions mode. If you're just in like the let's get it done mode, then you're going to get something done, but it might not be what you're proud of getting done. And they both have their role. I'm not saying that work mode is not a mode that we need to be in. But I often think about when I'm trying to connect with my son and then going back to getting work done. And like in the same day, even, that's sometimes really difficult to go from like, I'm trying to do my own things and get it done in a tight amount of time. And then let's quick switch and then be present and open and listening to my son and really hearing him, and then interacting. It's hard because I'll often find myself trying to jump into that open and curious mode with my child. And I'm still in a bit of the work mode. And I'm like, well, I don't have time for this, and hurry up. And this is the answer, and go do it. So hurry up. And we talked about this before. And that's terrible, because maybe that's the voice in my own head when I'm in work mode. Like, hurry up. Why are you making mistakes here? Let's hop along here. And it also makes me think about what Joe was saying earlier about, ages ago, people never really reflected on parenting. Parenting was just how to bring up a kid and help them survive. And learning was just natural, right? It happened, and we didn't have to worry about all of the subjects that are conventionally taught in school. And another difference between now and then is that today we're doing all the roles of parenting that long ago were a village. And I know that's something that's often said, but if you just think about it, really like caring for, playing with, helping, guiding, just listening, just being there, having a story, entertaining. Those are like your roles as a parent, but that was 40 people back, like, I don't know, thousands of years ago. And now we're like, oh, well, that's your parents. That's your job as a parent, is to do all those things. And some parents are always, I hear one of the biggest things, the biggest hurdles for parents is playing, or playing with their kids, or being in like a fantasy type situation where their kids are like, all right, we're playing house. Come on, Dad. And Dad's like, yeah, this is not my thing right now. Yeah. Sorry, it brought up a lot for me.
You didn't play house with Kai?
Never.
Oh, well, so we've been listening to some hardcore history with Dan Carlin lately. I love that podcast. If you're not familiar, we have a history club that you can go and check out some of his stuff. But he actually did a history of parenting, and that's hard to do because if you look at what people wrote about through history, like a lot of history, we're basically getting writings, old writings. And what are people writing about? They're writing about the kings and the wars and it's not like a documentary of like peasant life, right? Or somebody doing a survey of parents, be like, so what's your role? How do you see your role as a parent, to like some peasant during the Middle Ages, right? But one of the things that really struck me from listening to that history was how just incredibly challenging it. I mean, people were just trying to survive. Like the average life expectancy of humans up until like a few hundred years ago was only 20 years. And up in certainly like after the agricultural revolution, the goal of parenting was to get your kid out there to help with the farm and just to survive. And in many cultures, kids didn't even have names until they were like 2-3 years old, because at that point it became relevant. Oh, you can actually work now. You can do something like, husking the corn, right? So like, why are we being intentional about parenting now? We have the luxury of not needing to constantly worry about survival. But then that creates this, it's like a problem but also an opportunity, because humans evolved to have a clear purpose when they were growing up. And it certainly wasn't easy life. It was extremely challenging life, which is one reason why I talk about anti-fragility in children all the time, is that, kids grew up in these horrific environments. You can't listen to Dan Carlin's history of parenting and walk away thinking that kids aren't incredibly resilient and can survive just about anything, right? But one thing they always had is they had a clear purpose. And I think one of the challenges now is that it's like, how do we manage to keep some kids where they're perpetual babies until they're 25? It's like, well, if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, if they have no clear purpose or meaning in their lives, then they will continue to act like children for a very long time. And if we don't come up with how do we create that, it's not going to happen naturally the way it did when humans were fighting for survival for thousands, million plus years.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much I can share about my parental beginnings, but I was bringing up in the empowering youth community a thought that I was having about kind of what is the goal of parenting, as you were saying earlier, Dan, about being more intentional in all of these aspects, even like the last podcast about being intentional about holidays, is really understanding like what is the goal? What am I even trying to do here? And so I would sometimes get comments from parents saying like, oh, you should just live your childhood. Why are you trying to like save the world when you're a kid? And I think going back to what my dad was saying about how kids had a purpose, like it was, you were out there, you were helping your parents on the farm, or you were helping take care of your siblings because you had to. You knew what your value was as part of your family, as part of your community, and that's just not really the case anymore. And so while some people might see it as wasting your childhood, there's also, I think, much to be said about giving your kid a purpose and a way for them to actually use their skills that they're developing at a young age in a way where they feel like they're contributing in some way. And you do see this, I think, reflected in how, there's rising rates of depression and anxiety. If you don't feel like you're able to apply yourself in any way, if you don't know who you are, as you were also saying earlier, then I don't think that you can really raise a child who feels comfortable in their own skin, who knows their value and can feel as though they're appreciated by other people. So, yeah.
That makes me think of what is the purpose of childhood, right? And that can come from the child, but that can also come from us parents kind of reflecting on it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a question that people didn't ask before. That question was imposed on you by the hardships of life, right? Now all of a sudden we get to ask.
Yeah, I think Sumay, you nailed it. I think the goal of parenting, I think when I think of my daughter and other children, it comes apparent real quick. The goal of parenting, I think, is having kids that have their own values, right? I think that is the goal of parenting, right? I think that'll dictate a good life for that child, as long as they're purposeful. And the question is first to is that even a value? Is it a value to be value oriented, right? And if so, then what steps do you take? But I think the first step is really important. It's just that is the most important thing, because if you have somebody is value and purpose driven, they're always going to be thinking long term. They're going to, I think by definition, they would be more rational because they would be tied to reality. They're going to be trying to achieve goals. They're going to try and explore their surroundings. They're going to be inquisitive, right? So like that, I think to me, as my daughter was growing up, and this kind of goes to what Dan was saying earlier, I always wanted her to just be an active mind, right? Just try and learn as much as you can, ask questions. And I think those lead to values. And I think once a child gets old enough, they'll really understand kind of abstractly what values are. But in the beginning, you just want them to just ask questions and learn. But at a certain point, they're going to develop their own value system. I think that's the goal of a parent, to help instill that value orientation in a child. I think that's the most important thing. And I really think that's the goal of parenting, because I think that will set the child up for success and happiness through the rest of their life.
Well, go ahead, Dan.
Thanks, Joe. I think just supporting our children to have active minds is not as easy as it sounds. That sounds like a simple thing that we're like, okay, well, we'll just support the child to ask questions and learn more. But there's so many things that we do as parents that get in the way of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I didn't want to make it sound. It's something that is I think 24/7 almost, to do that. Almost from the age of the earliest I can remember. I was always. I think that is the challenge, but that's the biggest reward too, right? Because that always having that in your own mind as a parent, you're always going to be aware of how you're enabling that. I think it needs to always be in your conscious awareness of how you're developing that in a child. With your answers, right? When you say do something, is it because you told them to do it, or is it because there's actually a reason, right? For brushing teeth for kids is a big deal, right? So a lot of kids don't want to do it. Do you make them do it because you said to do it, or because you don't want to have teeth problems and gum problems, right? These explanations, and I think always thinking through that. And it's hard, like you said. I mean, we're stressed, we're tired. I mean, we're juggling a bunch of things. But from as far as I'm concerned, I think it's being a parent is my number one value, right? So how you that always kind of trumps everything in my mind. And I'm always kind of holding that unconscious awareness in my interactions. And I think that's the first and foremost thing that we can do as parents, is always think through that, right? If that's a value to you, you're going to always kind of propagate that down. And I think the child will pick up on that, and they'll eventually start, I think they'll become receptive to it, and I think they'll adopt that as time goes on.
I definitely agree with what you were saying about having a reason, because it's not just like having an active mind for the sake of it, or learning for the sake of learning, but to actually apply it in some way and to understand why you're doing it. And I think, the term knowledge is power is used a lot, but I don't think a lot of people really understand how or why that's the case, because for a long time, that just wasn't really something that was actually going to help you practically in your life. If you were to just like go to the library and read all the books in the library, it wouldn't necessarily actually have a big impact on your daily life or your livelihood. But now there's just so many opportunities to scale that and leverage it to add value to other people, and to actually use it in ways that can really help you. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I think in a way, how our society has evolved into more of networks than communities really challenges, creates a barrier to children learning. And I think in the past, it was a lot easier for children to be around adults, and apprenticeships were like a common thing. And if you were interested, you just go hang out. Don't get in trouble and don't get in the way, and then you can learn how to do something that had value in society. And now, now that we are in more of networks where we're congregating around people that are in the same company, in the same business, instead of people that chose to live close to us or be around us now. And add on to that parents often have to go to work, or have to be in a separate space for their work, that children can't just pop in and see what's going on. In some cases they can, right? But I feel like to a large degree in US families, kids don't get a sense of what their parents are doing. It can't just be slow, interesting, hey, let me pop in, see what's going on. This isn't for me, I'm heading out. That complicates things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one quick thing. So the whole idea of games, like the children play these games, they tend to mimic parents, right? That's one of the ways that kids learned, is they would watch their parents. And that worked really, really well when they were around their parents, and their parents were doing things that they could understand just by watching, like hunting or gardening or mending clothes or fixing a house, or, things that you watch and it's just obvious what the parent's doing, right? It's like the playing house. Well, yeah, that's because they were at home watching mom and dad play house, right? And now what do parents do? They're gone all day, just like the kids are gone at school. Then they come home, and what are a lot of the parents doing? Staring at their phones. They don't even know what they're doing on the phones. They just see their parents staring at their phones. And so the kids are like, oh, okay. I'm supposed to stare at my phone.
Isla and I used to play a spy game where we would spy on you and mommy, and we would just like be looking in the office like, what are they doing? It's just like you at the computer. It was still fun for us though, but
but it makes it harder because kids evolved to like mimic parents, but now it's just difficult because it's more complicated what they're even doing. It can be very far removed from something that's tangible and easy for them to understand. Like as an economist, I was trying to explain inflation to Sumay when she's 5-6 years old, and she got it, but I wanted her to know what I did. But it's like, how relevant is that compared to like, say, cooking? Elizabeth, I saw you had your hand up. Sorry.
Well, that's something that like Sumay and I had been discussing a little bit, because I was kind of trying to work on writing something, and she was talking about something very similar, and just discussing like the role in technology affecting kids' roles in society, and how, yes, like for a long time, kids were learning by doing, by being with their parents, by apprenticeships, whatnot. And when we got into like the Industrial Revolution, kids were seen as being able to be equal workers, but that wasn't a good situation, right? So they're in there working in factories, and then, you know, as a society, we decided, well, that's not a good idea, right? You know, so that's kind of where the rise of the school, the education system as we see it, came up, because it was a place for them to be safe and to have good access to information. But technology has changed a lot of that, where kids, you know, school is not the best place for them to have access to all the information, and it's not very safe anymore. But technology has also changed the fact that kids can once again safely do a lot of the work alongside parents, or learn to do. You know, obviously kids can learn a lot of these technologies like coding and things that are very integral in our society today, that are very useful. It has kind of brought things full circle for kids, I think, to be able to start to take their place alongside again.
I think you bring up a good point, Elizabeth, and this is definitely something that's close to Joe's heart. So I probably want to rope Joe in. But I don't think most parents understand how to juggle parenting and working, and then to meld them together into something that is useful and not like counterproductive. That's really tricky. That's really tricky. What are your thoughts, Joe?
I was just looking at the comment of,
Oh, well,
would love to hear from Rebecca.
I can defer to me if you'd like. Yeah, no, I think that it is tricky. And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier of trying to find a balance, and even the whole concept of technology. You know, for some of us, you know, myself included, we've had some bumpy roads with that, with the kids and, you know, school, and having taught virtual school myself. And sometimes I think it's a process of unlearning. You know, we have a perception of something being good or bad, but oftentimes things are a little bit of both. And it's a matter of navigating that and meeting our kids' needs, knowing that also. I think Dan and you and I were talking a bit about this the other day. You'd sent me an article about technology itself, and how for some, you know, neurodivergent kids as well, and it can be a tricky thing to navigate, because there are a lot of benefits and value there, but it can also become, you know, an addiction in worst case scenario. So I think it's like, part of it is not being fear-based as a parent, like not letting fear control you, being informed, but also paying attention to your kid, and being aware of like, okay, well, this is too much, or this is, you know, can be a trigger. So I guess it all comes back to conversation and community, and trying to navigate, find that balance together.
Okay. All right. I'm ready. I'm ready to come in here with a little thought or two on technology. Well, so I was really interested in this topic before the pandemic. Go Guardian interviewed me before they interviewed Sumay. Yeah, that's right, Sumay. It was the discussion was really about technology, and how do you use technology to create rather than consume. Oh yeah, you actually took that same title in the speech that you gave.
Yeah.
Recently. Yeah. Okay. That's where that
Creators.
came from. It came from that interview in 2019. Okay.
Yep.
So I think the idea there is also about purpose and intentionality, where if you're using technology to create something valuable, then all of a sudden all these problems go away. Like I just never had issues with my daughters using like say their phones to just like sit around binge watching YouTube videos, or to go meeting random people on the internet that may not be a very good influence on their lives. Like that was just never an issue, because they knew from a very early age that the purpose of using these tools was to try to do something constructive and useful, and they knew that they knew what that was. It was the concept of the project, right? It was like, why are you using YouTube? Well, it's because we made a song together, or we made a little video about for our little show called Saturday Morning Live with Pandas. It was about how to do Python coding, right? And so that's why we're using YouTube, right? So I think if kids understand that the purpose of these tools is to use them as a tool to try to do something constructive, then they'll be constructive. But that actually takes some training, something that we're looking to put together for part of the Weequel membership too, like a digital intelligence program for kids under 13 that want to be able to use an app, that they would have to go through that process to actually learn how to do it, go like way beyond the COPA laws and just having a parent sign off. It's like, no, we want to actually give the kids some training and the parent so that they know how to do that.
There was a comment earlier, can a child be happy without having a sense of purpose? And that's pretty deep, and it really makes me think about what is purpose. Can we define what purpose means? Because a child, just fooling around on TikTok, that's a purpose for them, right? But how are we defining purpose? And for Joe, it was about being constructive or adding value, right? But how broad of a lens do we want to include in purpose? Because I think there's value across the spectrum, but there's more value in different areas. So I think that might be something that we want to try to define.
Yeah, well, I think at least for me, my understanding of it is kind of, do you feel like your actions are appreciated and it has some sort of meaning and impact? Whether that's in your home, like if you're helping out around the house and cooking and cleaning, versus like trying to do something bigger and adding value to the world. Although I do think that as kids get older, you do need some sort of external validation outside of just your family. For young kids, it's not the case. Like when you're 5 years old, your parents are everything. Like if they're like, good job, you're the happiest kid in the world, But I think as you get older, you kind of realize that there is more out there. And I think that that's kind of I think that can serve as kind of a disconnect for some teenagers where they feel as though, they're in school, they're getting these grades, but they're not necessarily sure how is that really an indication of how valuable I am and what impact I'm having on the outside world, because it's a closed environment. And the same thing with a household as well, is that it is a somewhat of a closed environment, and you need to have engagement with other people outside of that to show to yourself, I'm having some sort of impact. And so I think as kids get older, there's a difference between where that purpose can really come from. Although even when you're older, definitely having validation from parents and family members is important as well. But would be curious to get other people's thoughts.
Well, you have to be careful with that, of course, but very, very early on when the pandemic first hit, I was taking some of the kids' projects that they were publishing on our first website on weequel.com, and I would share it on Facebook and on Twitter, but Facebook's like where a lot of my family and friends were like at the time. Not global, just friends and family, those connections. And that kind of worked, but it actually worked better when I put it inside of little communities, little clubs, or whatever you want to call it on Facebook, that were specific to a topic. So we created a bunch of those. We had one for economics, we had one for philosophy. And so when I was sharing it in that context where it's like, okay, these are friends of mine. I know these people. They know why they're in that particular room. It has there's a particular interest that they share. And here's something that my daughter wrote that relates to that topic. And I'm asking them for feedback to share with her, right? Part of that was I didn't have time to homeschool her, right? So like I could give her feedback, but I was worried that maybe my feedback is not going to be the best feedback. Maybe there's other feedback that she could get from other people. And it was fabulous. She was getting feedback and comments from like my major professor and like some other friends of mine from college talking about like a an article that she wrote about how she was struggling with a friendship that she had during the pandemic, and like their relationship was strained. And it was like, wow, this is cool. I'm crowdsourcing feedback from like my network of friends, but in a private environment, a very select environment. And I think that can be quite useful, but it definitely wasn't just like a little like here, or like here's a picture of Sumay. She's older now, you know, like it was deep.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, with parenting, I've kind of like learned to, I think a lot of times with kids and a lot of people, they look at kids that are doing this or doing that, and they're like, oh, that's just bad. That's bad for kids. It's a bad thing for them to do, whatever. But I think it is important to look at, like, if kids are trying to become Instagram famous or TikTok famous, or, like, what are they looking for? Obviously, there is something there that is appealing to them, that's meeting a need that they feel like they have. Hi, Joe. And so, I think it is really important to, instead of just look at kids and what they're doing and say, well, that's not good. That's not good. Like, why are they doing that? If your kid is on the internet looking for connection from strangers that are, not appropriate for them, well, yes, they shouldn't be doing that, but why are they doing that? So that's where, I think the idea of the project and having a select group of peers, obviously kids are looking for feedback from other people on what they're doing. That's an idea that is really exciting to them, and it's taken over the world. And versus when you look at what a kid does in school, yes, occasionally they might do a project in front of their peers, but their peers probably don't super care because it's not a unique thing. They're just handing in something to a teacher who's telling them what they did wrong, like that is not fulfilling their need for that kind of input from other people on what they're doing. So I think that's part of why Sumay and Isla came up with this. They as kids, kind of intrinsically understood that need for that kind of input and created a world that is safe and productive where they can get that need met. So I think that's a very powerful aspect of We Equal School.
I think you bring up a good point here, Elizabeth, and that is kind of grounding this conversation in, again, openness and curiosity. Like, why is my child attracted to this thing that I don't value? And then it also brings up the idea of adultism, and like the adult gaze, basically coming from the adult. They're the ones that value what's happening, but isn't it also fair to include the child's values, right? And then it's tricky too, because depending on the age of the child, they're still developing things like metacognition, where they're thinking about thinking, or they're planning, or any of that higher order, figuring out what their intentions are, what their purpose is. And sure, that's for the parent to help them guide. But I think there can be a line in terms of, how do I explain this? Maybe information versus indoctrination, or, the parent's view versus like, you have to do it my way, and that's the way to do it. Because I know better, just because I'm an adult. Yeah.
Does it feel to anybody else like a lot of teenagers now, they see the world now so much more than they used to because of things like cell phones and the internet, and they want a sense of purpose, like they want a sense of adventure, they want to be part of something big, right? That's like a lot of them, young people tend to be the activists, for example, when there's like regime change from governments changing, or when there's some kind of big problem, like like Greta Thunberg talking about the environment and needing to protect the environment. Like these teenagers, they want to do something big, right? They want their lives to be meaningful. Like I think sometimes I think we adults forget what it was like to go through that. And at some point we're like, well, I was going to change the world, and now I'm going to I'm gonna go ahead and just be satisfied with just trying to save my marriage or something, you know, just like try to, you know, the grandiosity of kind of how we see the purpose of our life kind of gets a little bit more moderated. But these young people want to feel like they're going to do something big. And how do you get a sense for that if your entire life plan is already laid out for you for years, the way that schools do, and you're never really exposed to anything that is like, it's like tailor-made. Your life experience is tailor-made to not be too much, to not push you too hard. You know, we can't make it too difficult, right? Make sure that there's a clear answer to every question. I feel like that's just, of course that would drive some people crazy, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, that's something that a conversation that I've had a lot with my daughter, just in how much access to information kids have, but also like just to like, I think when we were kids, a lot of us that are older, when we were teenagers, we were a lot more like oblivious. Whereas kids my daughter's age, like, they know every opinion that everybody on the internet has about everything. And that has good and bad effects in that in some ways it's led, I think, to a much higher rise in anxiety, because you know that just about anything you do, somebody in the world is going to have a problem with and think you're a terrible person for having that opinion. But at the same time, it's read in my kids, I see a very high level of empathy for other people. But I think, yeah, that idea of having the like the ability to do something big, to do something purposeful, I think that is part of why the social media platforms are so huge for kids right now, because it is the only outlet that they have had. And I've seen that my kids haven't had their entire life, their time taken up by school, and it hasn't been dictated. Social media is as much less importance to them because they've really had time and freedom to explore the things that they're excited about and interested in.
That last question is the goal to be happy or live a life of meaningful adventure? And it's easy for parents to jump and say, yeah, I want my child to be happy, or I want my child to be successful. And it's like, well, we're not always happy, and that's okay. You know, there's a complete opposite of happy, and that is a valid, you know, human emotion that we experience, and it's valuable, right? And yeah, a life of meaningful adventure, that sounds amazing, right? And I'm also thinking about, like, adults, I think some of the things that hold us back from achieving what we want to do are, you know, stress, responsibilities, disenchantment with life. And for children, they don't have those things to that degree that parents have. And so that's why you see, I feel like that's why you see youth kind of being large on the front lines of activism. And, you know, they can be very goal oriented and get a lot of stuff done. And we saw that, right? We were talking about Greta, but even with the climate, there was recently in the news, like about a month or two ago, that there was basically a group of kids that sued their local government or their state, I can't remember, about climate change itself. And then they were successful in doing that. But you don't see parents being successful, or I'm saying parents, but adults being successful with those types of things. And then another thing that brings up is that maybe it's also that kids want to empower themselves to be in control of what they think is right. But adults can kind of work their way into comfort. And when I say comfort, I don't necessarily mean painless, but what I mean is something that they're used to, right? So they're used to the way that they live, and they don't necessarily want change because that could be uncomfortable. Whereas kids are like, well, I just want to be empowered and I just want to do what's right. Jeff, what were you thinking?
Well, yeah, going back to what Joe and what you were just talking about, and even what Elizabeth was saying about activism, particularly for like environmentalism, but I think just political activism in general, it's precisely because I think, and this might be a hot take or controversial. I don't mean it to be like offensive at all. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think that it's precisely because there's a lack of value, and they look for this collective sense of purpose, right? It's like that mob mentality where there's a group, and whether the not really understanding all the facts into like climate change or environmentalism, but it's this because they don't have an individual sense of purpose, sense of like a long-term goal orientation. They're grasping for straws, and the straws will be kind of this low-hanging fruit of what's nearby, what's just like what the group is doing. It's this orientation of the other, right? It's not in a kind of meaningful, first-handed, like independent grasp of reality kind of way. It's just, this is what's going on around me. I need to belong, and there is a need to belong. There's a need for purpose, right? There's a need for valuing. And you're either going to get that from the right way or the wrong way. And the wrong way is this kind of collective orientation towards political activism. I think that's wrong in every sense. I think the real way is to kind of be a valuer, and like Sumay was alluding to earlier, just thinking through your values. What do you want? Do you use technology as a tool to produce or consume? I think that was a great way to frame it. If you have a producing, a building orientation, you're not going to fall prey to a lot of this kind of political stuff because you're going to be too busy thinking about what you can make and how you can produce value. And that's a huge fundamental distinction between that I see what's going on, especially with young people that don't have value, don't have purpose, and that struggle to find that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Also, to the question about like what is the difference between activism and complaining, I think it's just when it comes to these very, I guess, big problems where people have a lot of very strong opinions and you can find community. I think that's just a very easy way for young people to feel as though they're doing something and they're having impact, kind of in a way where they have this community around them that's validating them. They have the same opinion, and that's just an easy way to satisfy that need. But the truth is, these big problems, they don't have right or wrong answers. There's a ton of nuance, and I think when it comes to the people actually trying to solve these problems, it's less like this is bad or this is good, and just like let's sit down and have a very complex conversation about what's the proper solution to this big problem. But that's just not something that's easy or convenient when the really, I guess, imminent need is some way to feel valuable, some way to have purpose, and some way to also have a community that recognizes that. And so I think that's the big problem that we're trying to solve with these learning communities and this process that really does allow kids to have an impact, not just with those that they know, but in a real way where they can start businesses, where they can build their own communities around problems that they care about, and actually be thinking about these big solutions that are nuanced, that are complicated, but can definitely be, you can make the world better if you do sit down and have these conversations and try to build a solution, especially with the creation of technology, because it's just that much easier to actually build a solution without capital, and without a lot of resources. And so I think that that's a big thing that we're trying to solve, but it is definitely very hard.
I think one thing that children struggle with here is that if they have good ideas or they even just want to be heard, society generally thinks that it's older people that have the better ideas. So they don't let children to the table. They don't let youth to the table. And if we're talking about activism versus complaining, I think activism starts at complaining. That's what we all do. We complain about something we don't like. And that's kind of just the first thoughts of it. Like, this doesn't work for me. And if you stop there, that stinks, right? But sometimes, we stop there. But if we start to problem solve from that point, that's where the activism becomes meaningful and effective. I just want to center. I want to say that there is still very great possibility for kids to have nuanced opinions on things and still be effective with activism, especially if they're empowered by the adults around them.
Oh yeah, I agree with that too. I think we've seen this a lot, more so with teenagers, where they'll have really powerful ideas, things that they're passionate about. But I think one of the challenges is like, how do you channel that, right? And because like actually trying to affect change, it's actually really hard, right? So like if you look at like what Sumay does on a typical day to try to help empower kids with education, a lot of it is like debugging code or going through comments from parents that left and like why, like what did they
Well, I
not
think
like?
when you're looking at it
Or-
from a high level, it's very easy to think of like, oh, well, here's the obvious solution. But until you're in the weeds, until you're actually trying to build something that people want that's actually going to impact change, that's when you just realize how complicated these things are. And if you just do it with one thing, you'll realize how much that applies in every aspect of your life and all these solutions, whether it's with government or whether it's with these companies where you see these problems, but until you're actually trying to solve one for yourself, you just don't understand how complicated and hard it can be. But that's just something that is really important to understand, especially now in this world where you can actually start to create those solutions. But yeah.
Well, Jeff's another example where it's like how many adults are out there complaining about how the education system does a poor job of teaching kids critical thinking skills. And then there's Jeff, who's like one in a million, who's like, I'm going to take time on top of being married, parenting my daughter Emma, and working full time, plus he's got to have downtime, maybe watch a football game or something. But on top of all that, he's moonlighting weekends, nights, building out the Who Am I app and thinking through all of the ways to apply AI and the different functions to try to create a solution that actually solves the problem. Right? It's like for every million people that are out there that are just pointing out all the problems, there's one Jeff. or like that. I mean, you're all like that. You're all actually doing something about it, but it's really hard. And I think that it has to be hard. Like, if it's not hard, I think that wouldn't you as a young person feel like there's something wrong? Like the Matrix? It's like the first Matrix failed. Why? It was like this perfect world where nobody was ever sad, but then humans rejected it. So they had to make a new world where there was hardship and pain and suffering, just like reality. They just had to recreate reality in the year 1999, and then human beings could accept it. Well, if becoming popular and famous is all you need to do, and you just keep sending, Photoshop selfies of yourself on Instagram, and you keep getting more followers, like, of course you're going to get depressed as a teenager. It's too easy. This can't possibly be the adventure of my life, right? It's got to be hard. For it to be meaningful, I think. That's life. That's why it's adventure, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'll just say to what you thanks. That's really, I really appreciate that comment, Joe. But I'll say I wasn't always that way. I kind of learned to be value oriented. I'll be honest, I was kind of a drifter most of my life. I kind of had like in the last like 5 to 7 years after I got married, and it's like once I had Emma, that's when I really started thinking like what is a good life. I started asking these questions, right? I never really asked the questions, until for a long time. So it can be done. It can be learned. I don't think it's something that's like born into anybody. I think anyone can just it's a certain like focus with your mind that you can do, and I think that's the ultimate goal, is to live a life where your mind is really active and really trying to, make sense of things and to really kind of pursue things that are going to make your life better and those around you better, those you care about, and those you're willing to trade your time and value with. So it's something that like I always think about with, you know, with just other people and my daughter. How can you instill that value orientation? Where I think that's the kind of the one that explains the many, in my opinion.
So how do you actually help a young person get that sense of purpose, to take responsibility, to do something big and meaningful with their lives in ways that actually have an impact, but don't have the flair of, oh, I'm going to save the world, or I'm going to save the planet, or I'm going to make sure that the right person gets elected, or like these things that are just, they're beyond any of our capacity to actually really affect, but to instead do the thing that is right there in your life that you can actually do something about. Like, I'm going to help my little sister understand algebra, or I'm going to help my parents after a house fire understand their insurance policy, or I'm going to, you know, help clean the dishes after a meal that my parent made for me, you know, because they're probably tired after making that meal, and I can ask them how their day was after they asked me, you know, because they want to feel loved and appreciated by their kid. Like, these are real meaningful things that kids could do in their life, right? But it's not like as sexy as like the big, oh, I'm going to save the world stuff, you know, but not actually do anything. I feel like that's the big question, right? I don't know, Dan, you're Yoda. How do we help kids develop a strong desire and sense to want to affect meaningful change in their lives and have a sense of purpose and identity built from that, instead of just this attractiveness to like, oh, I've got my sign, I'm going to go complain about something, but nothing actually gets done?
I'm not even going to answer your question. And what I'm going to do is instead give you another question. What you're talking about here is deep and awesome. And the fact that you've made it to here in parenting to ask this type of question is amazing. How do we get parents to the point that they understand that these questions will come up and these questions are important from the start? How do we get parents to understand that this is what is in parenting before they even decide to have kids? I think that's a bigger question, right? I don't have an answer for it. I
think that might be a good place to leave it for next time to try to tackle, because that is the question. I know I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking, I love my life, or I love my wife. Let's make a baby. I'm not sure what else was going on in my head at the time. And trying to figure out the meaning of that was something that was just part of the journey. But yeah, I feel like that's a great question. How do you communicate that to parents? Isn't that part of empowering youth? Feels like a cornerstone. Like a wake-up call, like a red pill. Like, hello? You just brought a life into this world. Hello? Hello? And then actually take some inspiration from that, to be inspired by that, to think, and to know that just giving them whatever they want. Oh, if they're screaming at you to want sugar in the aisle, you'd be like, ah! That like maybe giving them that to make them happy is not the best route to take. Like, to actually have some intentionality of thinking of like, well, how can I help my child to live a life of meaningful adventure, one that they're choosing, because it's not meaningful if it's imposed on you, right? To wake parents up out of that, I feel like that's like the red pill of empowering youth, is to realize that you have this gift, this opportunity to help do that for this young person that you brought into the world. And if you're not aware of that, then it's just going to pass you by. And who knows? They may never even wake up.
You know what I think complicates this too is the less that you know, the more you think you know, right? What's that effect? I forget what it's called. So me starting off with like an infant book in my hand and thinking I knew the world about what was going to come my way, and really the true deep responsibilities that I was going to have 10 years later. I was so naive to even think that I knew what was going to be going on.
I think there's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect of
Yeah.
like when you know a lot, then you feel like you don't know as much. And then there's also in the book How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big by Scott Adams, he talks about how he doesn't really believe in the concept of what are you passionate about, and he talks about how if something is working well for you, you'll become more passionate about it. If you're investing more time and showing with your actions that you care about something, then your understanding of how much you care about it will compensate based on your actions. And I think that I'm in this world where parents are generally, there's two working parents with full-time jobs, and they just don't have the time or the resources oftentimes to actually spend time with their kids. And so to kind of, if they really value their kids, then their actions are kind of speaking against that. And so because of that, it can be hard for them to really feel as though they have that connection, or they're really, if they are spending a lot of time working, then how are they really able to feel as though they're spending enough time with their kids to feel as though they really actually care enough about that. And so I think that there is a problem with not really having the capacity to spend that time and to show with your actions that you do care and you love them. And of course, all parents, they think like, oh, I do love my kid and I care about them, but just some of them don't have the opportunity to really put in the time to really actually show that. So
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, and we should probably wrap up. But there's a privilege that I think everybody in this room has in having time to spend with their child and children, and the connection that's possible that a lot of people don't have. So it's really good to take a moment and really think about that, and recognize kind of the freedoms that we're allowed in this whole idea of empowering youth. And our goal is not to just empower ourselves. Our goal is really to empower everybody, right? Yeah. Hey, thanks for the great talk again today, guys and girls. It was awesome.